Hello everybody, my name is Christabelle Feeney. I am the Director of Employers for Change, which is an employer disability information service. I'm a white female with blonde hair and blue eyes, and today I'm wearing a maroon coloured dress and I'm seated with a lilac virtual background. So thank you very much for joining us today for our seminar on mental health awareness at work with Anne-Marie McDonnell and Angela Stewart. Anne-Marie McDonnell is Service Development Manager with RehabGroup. She has over 20 years experience working across aspects of disability inclusion, further education and training and inclusive employment. She started her career as an instructor and then a training centre manager with the National Learning Network. So with a postgraduate award in vocational rehabilitation counselling, Anne-Marie also worked as a technical advisor on disability inclusive employment practices in public employment services in the Middle East for over 5 years. Angela Stewart is a project officer with RehabGroup, having previously worked with them as a vocational rehabilitation consultant. And Angela's background is in psychology, behavioural therapy, research, design and development of training projects and services within the field of disability and inclusion. Mental health illness is a hidden disability that pre-pandemic affected 1 in 4 people. So with the added pressure of COVID-19 and the isolation experienced by many people throughout the last 18 months, we can only imagine that that's a number that has increased significantly. Anne-Marie and Angela will give us insight today into how we can support employees with mental health illness.
I'll just quickly say hello to everybody. I am Anne-Marie, and just following from Christabelle's cue, I am a white female with brown hair just over my shoulder. Today I'm wearing a yellow top and I'm beside a window with wooden blinds, which is letting a little bit too much sun in at the moment. And I'm delighted to be here to talk about such a great topic and with employers who obviously want to make change. And I'm going to hand over to Angela, who's going to take the first part of the session with yourselves today.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. I am also a white female with dark black hair, brown eyes, and today I'm wearing a navy top with a blurred background. So you're all so welcome here today. We will start the presentation. Let's see here. Okay. Now I think that should be up on everybody's screen. From the beginning, always a great place to start. Okay, everybody can see that?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. So we'll introduce RehabGroup, our organisation first. We'll start, probably some of you are familiar with some part of the organisation already, but RehabGroup is an organisation that supports 10,000 people who have disabilities and mental health conditions in Ireland, Scotland and Poland. So there's 3 divisions of RehabGroup. National Learning Network is the learning division. The community care division is Rehab Care, and then Rehab Enterprises provides direct employment to people who have disabilities, and it's a social enterprise itself. And our 2 funders are ETBI, or the 16 ETBs around Ireland, and the HSE, the Health Service Executive. So within RehabGroup, there's 10,000 people that are availing of services and engage in different aspects of the organisation. 28% of those people are actually people who do have mental health conditions. So it's quite a high percentage of people that are supported within the organisation, and they're supported by multidisciplinary teams of industry or industry experts who are subject matter experts in disability inclusion, trainers, psychologists, occupational therapists, behavioural therapists, learning support officers and employment support specialists. And just for the day that's in it, because we're talking about mental health, I just put a note here on the individual placement and support programme. That's one programme that's quite a special programme within RehabGroup. It's probably the most evidence-based approach to supporting people who have mental health conditions to get back to work and to start working. And that work can mean different things for different people. It might be a part-time job, it might be a full-time job. So that's a little bit about who we are. So we'll jump right into it and get on to mental health. So the aim of today is to raise awareness around mental health and mental health difficulties in work. The first part of our presentation is going to have a look at mental health, and then the second part is going to bring the learning back into the workplace and look at some kind of practical tips and accommodations about accommodating people who have mental health conditions in the workplace. And this aim, we're going to achieve it through two different objectives. We're going to look at the language around mental health in the beginning. I'll take you through the first part. So we'll look at mental health difficulty, and mental health condition, and what are the differences and similarities between them. And then Anne-Marie is going to take the learning back into the workplace, I suppose, and look at very practical tips and suggestions around job accommodations for employees who have a mental health condition. And really, at the end of today, our hope is quite simple. We hope that everybody who's online will potentially feel a little bit more comfortable about having a conversation around mental health in the workplace. And or we hope that perhaps you feel extra confident and you want to pick up the phone to somebody, to us, and you want to talk about potentially becoming a host company if you wanted to offer a work placement to a person who has a mental health condition and is looking for work. So either of those would be great. General awareness would be fantastic. So we'll start by looking at mental health. And the reason that we're here today is a little bit different. Usually when we have talks around the area of mental health, we're looking at these kind of aspects within work. So usually talks around mental health, work and wellness look at how to maintain the employee's wellness. So they zoom in and they look at things like, healthy eating, or nipping out to get a walk, or doing meditation, or whatever whatever it takes to keep you feeling well during the day. But that's not what we're here to look at today. What we're here to look at today is something a little bit different. We're looking at people who have mental health conditions and accommodating those people in the workplace. And the reason that that's still such an important thing to do, there's two pieces of research that I wanted to pop up on the screen. While our awareness of mental health and what mental health means to us like at home, in our family, and also in work, our understanding and awareness of that has come quite far. But there's still work left to be done around the workplace. And these are two pieces of research that kind of reflect that really well. And it says that 42% of Dubliners who were surveyed by Sea Change were not willing to work with somebody who had a mental health difficulty. And that was quite a striking statistic. That's a large percentage of people who would still feel some level of discomfort in working with a person who has a mental health condition. And the second one here, when people who have a mental health condition talked to the people doing this research, 38% of them surveyed said that they would conceal a mental health condition. So they wouldn't disclose it, they wouldn't talk about it to employer, and unfortunately they're denying themselves the opportunity to get fantastic supports and accommodations that might be made available to them by the employer if they had disclosed this difficulty that they were having. And I think that that's one of the major things that when we've been out doing training with employers, this is one of the major things, the questions that would always come back to us from employers that would say, well, how do we help people to feel comfortable enough to disclose a difficulty that they're having, or a support need that they have, an accommodation need that they have, because people are saying that they're not disclosing as often as they would like. So these are the reasons why this conversation is still very relevant, and I suppose just it's a useful thing to talk about, an important thing to talk about. Okay, so this idea of an umbrella of terminology, we've got mental health difficulty, and mental health condition. And we're going to kind of spend most of the time looking at the area of a mental health condition, which is categorized, I suppose, by the legal framework in Ireland as a disability. So let me see. So to start talking, I suppose, about mental health a bit first, just to contextualize our conversation before we move on, we want to situate our understanding of mental health around it being something that exists on a continuum. So it's not an idea of, it's not the kind of understanding or awareness of us having our mental health, or our mental, our mental health being this thing, and a different category of person having this experience of a mental health condition. It's that we all coexist on this range, or this continuum, and our place is not fixed. We can definitely move along this continuum from time to time. So if we're here on the continuum, if we're on the healthy end of the mental health continuum, it doesn't just mean that we don't have a mental health condition. It doesn't just mean that we don't have a diagnosed condition, which is, say, depression or anxiety. It doesn't just mean that. It means also that we have certain aspects or capacities to ourselves. So we're able to handle stress really well, or reasonably well. It doesn't mean we don't get stressed. Everybody gets stressed, but we can handle it reasonably well, that it doesn't impact our day-to-day activities in a big way. We can relate to others well. We can make good choices for ourselves, and those choices will typically maintain our wellness. So it means that we might make good choices around our food, or around different wellness activities. We might get out for a walk at lunchtime. We might get down on the floor and play with our dog. We might crawl around with our kid and, see the world from their perspective. Whatever it is that, takes you out of your day-to-day life and keeps you, maintains that feeling of wellness. Yeah, so that's what it means to be, I suppose, mentally healthy. What happens when we move on this scale? So when we move from here, and how do we move from there indeed? So a mental health difficulty that goes unchecked or unsupported can turn into a mental health condition. So what that means is, if we start experiencing certain symptoms, or we have certain experiences or feelings, it could be that we experience mood swings. It could be that we become really withdrawn. So we disconnect from our friends, we disconnect from our family. We experience relationship difficulties in the relationships that we do have. We experience low energy. We have difficulty performing our day-to-day activities. If those kinds of things start creeping into our everyday existence, then that means we might be moving on that scale, and we might be moving from one end, like the healthy end, to the difficulty end of the scale. And again, I suppose a note around this, and a note around the current restrictions and the way that the world is at the moment, it's quite reasonable that all of us would have moved into the reacting stage of the continuum, at least, if not experienced a difficulty during the pandemic, because life was so difficult, and it was so sometimes it was difficult to engage in the things that did keep us feeling well. We couldn't maybe connect with family in the same way, and you couldn't go to the gym if that was something that kept you feeling healthy. So yeah, so sometimes it's normal to move into the reacting aspect, because if you're in a situation where you can't access these things, it's normal for you to move along that scale. But I suppose for today, we want to continue to have an awareness of the difference between being mentally healthy and having a normal reaction to a very abnormal situation, and the difference between that and being a person who is diagnosed with a mental health condition. So a person who is diagnosed with a mental health condition, it does have a very significant impact on their day-to-day life, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, and about some examples of it as well. And I can't actually see the final number. Oh, I see it here. We have 104 online. So if we have 20% of the people who are online at the moment, the statistics would say that 25% of us would have a mental health condition. And that means 25% of us have actually experienced or are experiencing a mental health condition at this moment. So that means that it's been diagnosed, and that, that I suppose typically you are on one end of the scale, and you need to maybe take more steps and more actions to ensure that you stay feeling well, I suppose, and that maybe that you can engage in certain activities to start your recovery from a mental health condition as well. And we're going to talk about more about that in a moment as well. So mental health conditions and COVID-19, what does the research say there? And the research really has come out and said, I suppose what we'd expect it to say. We would expect it to say that that the pandemic has impacted all of us, made life a little bit more difficult. But I suppose if you do have a diagnosed mental health condition, that it's made it even more difficult for you if you're a person who fits in that category. So during pandemics, people with pre-existing mental health conditions experience significantly higher psychiatric symptoms and levels of anxiety, depression, stress, and sleep problems compared to adults without pre-existing mental health conditions. So while it has affected everybody, it's had a much more significant impact on people who do have a pre-existing mental health condition. So when we talk about mental health, these are the kind of conditions that we're talking about: anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, depression, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and schizophrenia. These are potentially the most common ones. There's many, many more. but probably these ones we're familiar with, or we've heard, I suppose, before in everyday life or on the news or on TV. What we're not talking about when we talk about mental health is we're not talking about autism, we're not talking about learning disability or specific learning difficulties, so dyslexia and dyscalculia. We're talking distinctly around the conditions mentioned above, which are mental health conditions. We're going to zoom into three of them. We're going to look at the definition of anxiety, then we're going to look at the definition of depression, and then we're going to finally look at schizophrenia. So we're not going to go into the framework or the kind of legal framework that protects the rights of people with disabilities and mental health conditions in Ireland. But just before we move forward to, I suppose, carry with us an understanding that this framework, so the Convention of Rights of People with Disabilities, the National Inclusion Strategy, the Comprehensive Employment Strategy, Disability Act, Equality Status Act, and Employment Equality Acts. These are this is the kind of legal framework, the strategies and so on that protect the rights of people with disabilities. So people who who are blind or who are deaf or a person who uses a wheelchair, their rights to accommodations in the workplace are protected by this legal framework. And in the same way, a person's rights, a person who has a mental health condition, if they disclose it in the workplace, their right to accommodations would be protected by the exact same legal framework. So anxiety disorders. An anxiety disorder is a group of mental disorders characterized by significant feelings of anxiety and fear. So anxiety is a worry about future events, and fear is a reaction to current events. These feelings may cause physical symptoms such as fast heart rate and shakiness. And the types of conditions that are within this category of anxiety disorders are described below. So we've got generalized anxiety disorder, specific phobia, social anxiety disorder, agoraphobia, panic disorder, and selective mutism. So while we all have an experience of anxiety from time to time, anxiety is, it's an aspect of human existence. We all have anxiety around different things. We have maybe anxiety as a normal response to normal stressors within day-to-day life. But if you're a person who's diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, it really means that the impact of these symptoms or the frequency of these symptoms have a very major impact on your day-to-day life. It has a significant impact on your day-to-day life that really impacts your ability to do day-to-day things, whether that's go to college, have relationships at home, manage your emotions on a daily basis, engage in work, and so on. It is going to have an impact at different points of your life. Schizophrenia is characterized by distortions in thinking, perceptions, emotion, language, sense of self, and behavior. And common experiences of schizophrenia include hearing voices and delusions. And I suppose those last two symptoms are potentially the ones that I suppose they're very different to things that we might experience in our day-to-day life. We don't all have an experience of hearing voices or of having delusions where we think something is very tangible and real is happening in our environment when it's actually not. We don't necessarily have that experience. So it can be a more difficult one to relate to, but sometimes it's not always how would you say, it's not always as significant or as big as we're made to believe by the news or by the media or by stories that we hear. There's one client that I worked with previously who had schizophrenia, and her specific delusion was that she felt when she was in a very stressful experience, like it could have been an interview, or it could have been an exam, or it could have been even in traffic, if she was driving and it was a particularly stressful day and the traffic was backed up and she was in a rush somewhere, her experience was that she would feel somebody's arms on her shoulders. And she really described it much like the experience of having that a boxer would feel if they were sitting in the corner of a ring and their coach was kind of helping them to feel relaxed or reassured. And it wasn't at all scary for her. It wasn't at all something that had a major impact. That specific part of her diagnosis wasn't something that had a very, very major impact on her day-to-day activities. But yet when we hear about it, we never kind of think of something as simple as that or as relatable as that, I suppose. So it's not always on the extreme end of the scale, our experiences of different symptoms. So depression. Depression is probably one that we're very familiar with, because anxiety and depression, if people generally do develop a mental health condition within their lifetime, anxiety and depression are the top two that we're likely to experience. So potentially lots of us in the room have experienced it already, and potentially some of us may experience it in the future. But depression is a health condition that is characterized by persistent sadness and loss of interest in activities that you normally enjoy, accompanied by an inability to carry out your day-to-day activities. And we don't have time to go into it today, unfortunately, but I'd really, really recommend this video. We're going to pop the link to it into the chat box for you guys to click on afterwards. And it's the World Health Organization's animated version or explanation of depression, and it's called I Had a Black Dog. And it's just wonderful. Like, it's just, if you were the kind of person that didn't, maybe you couldn't relate to the idea of having depression, or you couldn't understand how it could impact your day-to-day life in a very significant way. And yet it's kind of one of those conditions that people hide so often as well. And sometimes we hear after many years that somebody within our circle or our family or a celebrity, we all know examples there, that a person has had it many years afterwards and we weren't aware of it either. So it's just a lovely, lovely explanation, and I really encourage you to look at it afterwards. Yeah, and so we're coming on to the end. We've described the 3 different conditions, and now we're looking at the difference, I suppose, between being healthy and being mentally healthy, or having a mental health condition, and just having an awareness that the scale or the continuum, it's not set. Our place on this screen or on this set or on this range, it's not a set point. And from any one time, it's very easy for us to move from healthy to reacting to experiencing a difficulty. And if we don't get that checked, if we don't link in with our GP, or if we don't link in, say if it's a student who is in one of the services within RehabGroup, if they don't link in with their rehabilitation officer or their psychologist, potentially it could turn into a condition that was previously undiagnosed. And then the final note before I hand over to Anne-Marie is around recovery, that recovery from mental health conditions is possible. And that's something else that I suppose employers would kind of say to us afterwards, oh, we didn't know that it was possible to recover from this condition or from that condition, but it is possible. And recovery is really an ongoing process for a person who has a mental health condition, and it's definitely not linear. It doesn't mean the same thing from one person to another. It doesn't potentially mean the removal of all symptoms. It simply means that the person has made progress which they deem to be, I suppose, progress enough for them to consider themselves recovered. Maybe one day, maybe say 6 months ago, a person was unable to have a normal relationship in their life, was unable to go to work, was not ready or able to maybe manage their medication or so on. And then 6 months later, they're having normal relationships. They're actually able for the first time to get up every day, to make their own breakfast, to go to work and to have the crack in work, and to have, to do all their activities that they need to do in work, but to come home and with that sense of accomplishment. That's recovery for some people. It's different from person to person. And the recovery options for a person are different from person to person as well, but they do include workplace accommodations, engaging in self-help. And that might mean making an action plan around things that are triggers or things that help them keep feeling well. Engagement in self-care activities, engagement in talk therapy. They might go to support groups regularly. They might have medication, and occasionally, if required, if somebody is particularly unwell and acutely unwell at a particular period in their life, they may require a stay in hospital, because that is where that they can access the support that they need at that time. So thanks for listening. That's the kind of, we've looked at the area of mental health and the difference between mental health and mental health condition. And I'll pop you over to Anne-Marie, my colleague, to talk to you about some practical tips on accommodations in the workplace.
Great. Thanks, Angela. And it's such an important way to start the conversation before we start talking about job accommodations, to talk about the diagnosis, and it gets some of the myths and misconceptions that we may have about mental health conditions. out of the way. Some of the points that I love that I think we really need to bring forward to the next session is there is no others. It is not us and people with mental health conditions. Because of that continuum, we are all on that continuum. So there is no others to this. We're having a conversation about ourselves, our colleagues, and our workplaces. The other thing I love is just, it gives a really nice explanation about, I just thought today, obviously I'm a little bit anxious coming on to talk to 110 people that we have here today, but that doesn't mean I have an anxiety disorder. The same as sometimes I might experience a day where I'm feeling a little bit, have a lower mood, but that means perhaps I'm sad, feeling sad that day. It doesn't mean I have depression. So as employers as well, that we can think in the same way. People can have days, but if it's not having a massive impact on their life, then it may not be a mental health condition. So it's wonderful to see so many employers here today and Employers for Change. And what I just want to just recap on is we've talked about this a lot. Myself and Angela have done many, many sessions with employers. And we started doing them first, we reflected on what are the questions that are coming up most frequently at the end of sessions. And when we looked at the questions that came up from employers, they really had a theme, and it was around boundaries. And what employers wanted to ask was, how far do I go in making an accommodation? And how far should I not go as well? And obviously every case is individual, but we had to take a little bit of time to consider how to work with employers to understand that. So the best way to think about it is, you are an employer, a manager, or a supervisor, and what you're trying to do is make your workplaces inclusive. You're striving for inclusive workplaces. And what you want is that all your employees have equitable opportunities to succeed. So when you look out at everybody that you're managing or supervising, that they've all had the same opportunities to do their work, and the same opportunities, let's think beyond that, to thrive in their career. So that's what you're trying to do. And what can you not do? Well, like anything, you cannot do everything. You cannot answer every challenge that comes your way. So what are you not? Well, you're not a clinician. So there is clinicians out there. There is probably people who you're working with who have a mental health condition who also have a medical team. So what are you not there to do? Well, you're not there to give medical advice on medication or what therapies should I consider. That's not what you're there to do. While you as an employer have a duty of care to your staff, that doesn't mean you have a care, Angela, I'll just go back one. That doesn't mean you have a care function. So you don't have a responsibility around giving care, around therapies, around counselling. So they're just some things to have in your mind, that when you start thinking about job accommodations, I want you to think as much about what you don't do as much as what you do. So while Angela talked about mental health conditions, I'll talk a little bit less about that, because you've heard the phrase labels are for jars, not for people. We're going to talk a lot more about the work-related function and try and make this a little bit more practical for you to apply to your workplace. I'll just move on. So when we're looking at job accommodations, there's kind of three areas that you can think of looking at. So you think about what the duties are. What are those work-related functions? What might a person need support with so that they have that equitable opportunity? They have the same opportunities as other colleagues. And then if an employee has a specific difficulty, remember, they are the experts and they will potentially know something that has worked for them in the past. So potentially something they used in school, or they used in further education or higher education, or they used in another job. So very simply, you can say to somebody, has this happened in the past, and what did you do? And how did that work for you? And could we try that again? Agree the accommodation, agree what you're going to try. Know from the beginning, it may not always work, because you're going to implement it and then you're going to review it and you can tweak it. So it's a process. You don't make an accommodation and that's it. It is a process, and the employee is really driving that. They'll be the ones who are able to tell you if it's working from their perspective, and you as a supervisor, manager, employer will be able to see if this is working from a work perspective. Is this working for us as a company? So I'll just go on to look at an example where it's a person with a sensorial disability. Sometimes when we're working with employers, they're saying it's a little bit easier to think about accommodations, perhaps if it's somebody with a physical disability or somebody with sensorial disability, because sometimes I can see an accommodation and it prompts me to think about what I need to think about. But sometimes with a hidden disability, such as a mental health condition, it is a little bit more challenging for me. But let's just think of the same way we'd approach it. So Saoirse is 21. Saoirse has completed her education with the local further education and training centre, and now she's an apprentice as an accounts technician, and she's deaf. So let's think about what work-related functions might Saoirse need support with. So definitely, if we just go to the next slide, definitely we immediately start thinking about inclusive communication. And Saoirse uses Irish Sign Language but can also lip read. We need to understand how Saoirse interacts with information she gets in the office, perhaps things that come in through media or through audio clips. How might Saoirse be able to have an equitable experience as all the other colleagues in using these media clips, this information? And also very practically, we think about the environmental and health and safety considerations. So she would need to be able to be alerted to different alarms that are there. So now we'll just apply it to what accommodations might look like. So these are the work-related functions. So with Saoirse and inclusive communication, as a team working with her as an accounts technician, what we will all be conscious of is lip reading and good practice in lip reading. That if we are talking to Saoirse, we're not moving to the right, to the left, turning our back, holding cups up to our lips as we are talking to her. Also, we've got so much better and so much more tech confident now, and even using mainstream technologies, that teams around are confident putting on subtitles and closed captions when they're communicating information or in a presentation. And also in relation to the environment. So we would consider that it's not just a hearing alarm. We would need alarms with strobe lighting, and there's many different options. We can have vibrating alarms on desks as well. So now let's move and let's apply this to somebody who has a mental health condition. This is Simon. Simon is 32, and I am going to share what his diagnosis is just very briefly. Simon was diagnosed with schizophrenia at 25. He is a call centre manager. And in relation to the recovery options that Angela spoke about previously, Simon has maintained links with his medical team since he was diagnosed. And he also is very, very proactive in his self-care options. He's an avid hiker and has a good, small but solid network of support with family and friends around him. So now let's look at something that Simon is experiencing at the moment. Simon has something quite positive that's happening for him at the moment. Working with his medical team, they have come to a joint agreement that Simon is going to look at reducing some medications that he's taking. So it means a reduction and a slight change in some medication that he's taking. And while this has one effect of being really, really positive for him, he is also conscious that in the past, when he has changed medication, it has had some negative impacts on him. And these are in relation to, I'll just go to the next slide. So what Simon has flagged up before is when his medication has changed in the past, he has had challenges in relation to his stamina, his sleep, and managing stress. But what he wants to do is proactively address this and understand that this may happen to him, and discuss with his manager what we could do, what could be done proactively to plan around this and have accommodations in place if and when they are needed. There's 6 areas that we've here, but you'll notice very clearly we made a break for a very particular reason. Simon, we want to talk about 2 areas that he needs support on. The other areas are areas that people with mental health conditions and people that we work in our organisation with when they're transitioning to work and when they're in the work most frequently ask for support in relation to making that transition, and skills and competencies to have in their personal toolbox when they're out in the workplace. But as employers, what we don't want you to think is if somebody tells you it's a mental health condition that you look at this slide and think, all these 6 areas in a checklist, and this is what I need to accommodate. Like we were saying, it is different for every person. So I could have schizophrenia, Angela could have had schizophrenia, but how that impacts on me and how it impacts on her is completely different. So what I'm going to do is we're going to step through, reflect back on Simon, what's happening to him quite positive, may have a short-term negative impact on his ability to do some work. And then we're going to use these examples with some other employee personas as well and talk about how we can accommodate that need. So let's look at Simon first. And stamina and disturbed sleep is one of the things that he wants to, first of all, look at accommodations for work. So in relation to disturbed sleep, he does have fatigue during the day. For a short period of time, he has agreed with his manager that in addition to the work breaks, he will take small rest breaks during the day, just 10 minutes here and there throughout the day, and he will reflect with his manager on how this is impacting and when he is hoping that he will return back to his normal work patterns. It's a call centre. It works from 8 to 8. So he also is going to look at flexi time in relation to when he is on board, if that is needed. In relation to stamina, he has recognised previously from taking medication that it seems to have the greatest impact on him later in the day. So that in the mornings, he seems to have quite high energy, but later on in the day, he starts to have more fatigue and lag a little bit. So what he would like to do is, because he is the call centre manager, he still wants his team to have that daily talk where they're focused on their key performance indicators. So it's important to him that he comes out there and he shows high energy and enthusiasm. So he used to do them at the end of the day with everybody to say, job well done. But he's like, he wants to flip it for a month just to make sure that when he's given the message, he is his usual bright, sparky, enthusiastic, we're going to reach these KPIs. So he'll do that in the mornings. And in the afternoons, he'll withdraw back more into the office space and do the administration around the job. So that's one way he's dealing with it. So at times as well, we're going to look at Simon when he was saying, sometimes I have challenges in managing stress during periods of transition as well, or change that's going on in my life. He has accessed the employee assistance program and uses some counselling supports through that. He hasn't used it, but knows that he can avail of it in the future. So he's just flagging up with his manager again that he is aware that there is a support program for him. At times in managing stress and ensuring that he is doing his job and reaching those important KPIs that are important to him, he checks in with his manager. What he wants to look at as well is perhaps increasing the frequency of these meetings during this period of time to ensure he's staying on track, because the last thing he wants is in a few weeks' time to be faced with a challenge where he fell behind in his KPIs. So he is going to make a decision with his manager whether the increasing the frequency supports, but sometimes the stress may impact a little differently. And he may say, actually, we used to meet 3 times a week. Can we just meet once a week now? Because I'm actually finding the meetings are increasing my stress levels a little bit. And also in relation to managing stress, this is something not particularly that Simon as himself is asking for as an accommodation, but just generally in talking about what supports greater understanding of mental health conditions in the workplace than simply training. Days like today, where there's teams who understand, as we're talking about, understand mental health, health difficulties and mental health conditions, and the changes that we may need to make during our working day to accommodate people at different times. So just being more inclusive. So we're going to stop talking about Simon now, because there were 2 challenges that Simon had and had a good experience in how to overcome them. Now we're going to meet Brian. So Brian is a computer programmer. And I don't know what Brian's diagnosis is, and we actually don't need to know. So now we're going to start talking about not using those labels and diagnosis. But what Brian's challenge is around attention and concentration. And at times, if there's lots of noise, a really busy environment, he just finds it so challenging to do his work. So he has some simple accommodations. And I think you'll notice that a lot of the accommodations we talk about are low cost and sometimes no cost. It's about mindset. It's not about something physical. So Brian uses noise cancelling headphones. There's also different spaces. In picture 2, you'll see different spaces. So this is a space with kind of semi-frosted glass, which is also a place that if you're sitting there working, you see less people passing, there's less traffic that you can see. So that's also a way he considers in if he's finding his attention or concentration is really being impacted, somewhere he can put himself. Also just looking at more open plan spaces and seeing portable room dividers, which also support a little bit in having less noise. So for Brian, in relation to the challenge that he has said, these are some areas that work well for him, which are not high cost accommodations to make it all. So we'll move on to another area to look at. Organising and planning. Okay, so in this we have Kevin. Kevin is a retail assistant. He's a senior retail assistant. And sometimes his challenges, his predominant challenge in doing his work is around organising and planning. But there is very simple accommodations that can be put in place for his kind of short-term and medium-term planning. So he's a senior assistant, senior retail assistant. So he can look at how to prioritise the work. Is there certain things as the senior that he has to do? So put those on the list that he has to do. Are there other things that come in that only he can do? So perhaps some new stock coming in, perhaps he's the one who can do it. So he puts that into his schedule. There's other things that while he can do it, of course, so can some of the junior retail assistants, and perhaps delegate some of them. And also at times when things are getting too much, what we all need to do is look and see, does this really need to be done? Just because I always did it does need to be done. And perhaps delete is not the right word for a retail assistant, but some stuff could maybe be parked or look at a different way of doing it at a later time. So definitely that's one area that he's working at. The other area is if it is times where it's becoming overwhelming and he's perhaps not able to get to that stage to look at, okay, well, I believe this is a priority, but I wonder, is that my manager's priority? So if there's uncertainty about how to do the scheduling and how to identify what a priority is, it might be linking it with the manager to say the priorities for the business today would be this. So I'd like you to deprioritize that area and increase the priority of this. And that seems like we'll get everything covered then today. And then other areas around like what works well for you, like if he's doing stock taking and inventory and that, like what works well, down to simple document management, like how does he choose to show, is there different colored files for different areas, whatever works for you in organising and planning. So again, we didn't mention a mental health condition, we didn't mention a diagnosis, we mentioned the challenge. And while today we're talking about mental health conditions, I think you can see for other disabilities as well how those support needs might also be addressed in the same way. So we'll go on to another area around managing time. So this is Emer, who we have here, and Emer has a challenge in relation to managing time. She's an administration assistant, but she does know from her time in further education and training, she does know that when she linked in with her key tutor and was giving them regular updates on where she was in her assignment, how her studying was going for the upcoming exam, that kept her on track and managed her time. So what she wants to look at is, can she bring the learning that she had from school, which was, I used to check in with my tutor regularly and that meant I always got my assignments in on time, to if I check in regularly with my supervisor, that would support me in getting my work tasks done in time. And then there's so many just wonderful mainstream discrete technologies that can be used as well. So her calendar just on her phone that she uses with her reminders, and that she has everything booked in when her deadlines are, when her reports are due, when she needs to get a presentation ready. And then some other tasks as well, where she knows that she can get quite distracted. So she wants to give herself dedicated time. So setting timers and dedicating 25 minutes to get this task done with no distractions is also supporting her in doing her job. And then finally, what we're going to look at is memory. So also we look at Emer again for memory and managing time. So again, reflecting on things that happen. It doesn't have to be high tech or costly. So memory, nothing wrong with some post-it notes on your wall, on your door, I still have the stick your alarm on my front door for leaving, things like that. Again, mainstream technologies using Microsoft Teams, your Outlook, whatever it is, scheduling and showing what meetings you have coming up. And also we can see here very simply a mainstream technology, Alexa, with reminders on what time your meetings are at. So that's kind of the end of us looking at accommodations in moving through where we talked about a person, and we talked about their diagnosis and how something positive was happening in their life but may have a negative impact in work for a short period of time, and then moved away from not talking about a diagnosis, just talking about a challenge, a work-related function, and how to overcome that. So I hope that's increased confidence around supporting what you can do, and again to reflect back on your job in providing equitable opportunities to complete a job and equitable opportunities to succeed in career, and remembering that you cannot do everything for everybody. There may be times people need clinical supports, there may be times when people need therapeutic supports, and people need a network of people around them. So as an employer for change, it's wonderful to be part of that, but you don't have to be everything, you can be part of that. And I'm going to finish off with something that we like to share just about work and about what work means, and some people have given us permission to share their stories. So Angela, I'll just go on to our last slide. So as we're employers for change and we've got 100 people with us at the moment, we want to talk about being a change agent. These are not pictures of people. These are just stock images that we use to reflect stories that we've been told over the last few weeks. And it's talking about when people get a job and the positive impact it has. So all these stories were selected because not one person spoke about the salary as being what made the change. Of course, that's really, really important, but we wanted to talk about other things that happen when a person gets a job outside of what they see. So by giving a first work experience placement, or by giving that job, or having a returnee-ship for somebody coming back, these are potentially some of the things that people are going to be saying when they go home to their families. So the first picture here, we have a person who's looking lovingly at a car, and it's for somebody who we know who has got a job, and they were getting the bus in and out to work. But what they did was they started putting a bit of money back into the car, got the NCT through, and now they're back on the road driving back in and out to work. So it's the difference this has made. The person is saying how great it is to be back on the road again. The picture on the top right is not actually a person who we supported directly to get back into work. It is a wife of a person who we supported to get back into work. And what she's shared with us, with permission through her husband, what she has shared with us is she's like, it's great to be back to the normal dynamic in the house, the fighting and laughing in the evenings, and not having you know, medication and hospital appointments being the only thing we talk about. So we're just back to being regular husband and wife again. It's fantastic. So it was that dynamic coming back into the house. The other gentleman we have here, he again told us, and Angela alluded to it earlier as well, just talked about getting back into work for the crack, just actual having a laugh and taking great pleasure in being the only Dublin head going around wearing the mask with the Dublin GAA logo on it. I'm taken from that. He is the only Dublin fan in there, but takes great pleasure in it. And that's one of the things he's getting a kick out. This is another gentleman in the lower right-hand picture. This is a gentleman who has returned to work, a new workplace, not returned to his work. He's gone back into a workplace, and he had a period of hospitalization over the last 3 years. And what he's sharing with this is, he was saying to us, it's great to be in a job. At home, they treat him a little bit with kid gloves because they were so concerned when he was in hospital. But he's now saying, I'm out, I'm recovered, I'm doing great. And the difference is, in work, everybody just treats him like him. And at home, he's like, there's still a little bit kids' gloves with me. So that's why work is important to me, that I'm talking about me, not me when I was a patient. So we hope you'll be a change agent. We would love after today if you were open to a work experience placement for the first time, or when you have job vacancies that you consider contacting us. I'll give you some details here at the end. We are contactable at employerservices@rehab.ie, So you can send a WhatsApp or a text message or anything and request a call back. So we hope that after today, somebody will be change agents, and some of those stories we talked about earlier, you'll be the people who are the change makers, and the stories will be told about how you've done that.